Hello and welcome back to another episode of TACHES Teaches. I'm Tash, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about prechords in the grid. So without further ado, let's jump right in. What is a prechord? Well, prechords are something a little particular to Bitwig, and they themselves define it as being a common connection pre-patched in advance. And anywhere you see on any modules a little logo similar to these, that can be turned on and off, that is a prechord. And what prechords exist to serve the purpose of is just meaning that you have less cables everywhere. It's sort of like a hidden connection, that they're things that you're very often going to connect up. So it's a case of it's better that you turn them off if you don't need them rather than they be there all the time. So any of these kind of yellow prechords, you can see here we've got a gate prechord. We've also got a trigger prechord, and these are in fact the same. They serve the same purpose, and they all pertain to gate information. And what gate information is when there's a note held or not, held or pressed. With the square one like this is gate information, and that's saying play this envelope or hold the envelope as long as the note is held, and then release after we let go. On this one, this is just a trigger information because there is no sustain. So as soon as you press a note, we go through the entirety of this envelope. And with these gate or trigger inputs, if I were to turn off the prechord, you can see that we're not anymore getting, we're not moving through this ADSR envelope. And all that is the equivalent of having brought in the I/O section a gate in module and connecting that to the gate in of the envelope. And now we're back to normal. And so this right here is the equivalent of just having that off. And you can imagine if you have lots of envelopes that it would start to look a bit messy if you were connecting all of them, and it's just unnecessary. In this case, if you don't want it to be connected to when you press a note, all you have to do is turn it off. But by default, it's on. Moving on, we've also got then pitch prechords. And if I were to, let's take an audio out so we can hear this now. If I were to play straight away, I can press any note and the sine wave will move to that note. And in the modular world, you would have to set that up. You would have to set a keyboard is controlling the pitch or how much it's controlling the pitch. So what's quite cool about this is not only does this pitch prechord attach a pitch in to the input, but it's also spread it correctly out over the keyboard. That having this on is the equivalent of having pitch in set to 10 octaves, which is 120 steps. So this is now the same. And if we were to have this any less, you'll see that what happens is it's basically saying having this up full says 10 octaves, not 12. It's saying fit 10 octaves across the whole keyboard, which is what gives us a nice spacing. But if I were to then put this to, say, just 12 semitones... Oh, I've still got it on. Now that's me pressing all of the notes, and that's basically saying put 1 semitone per 10 notes. So having this up full is just the equivalent of having this off. You'll also see this sometimes on filters, and you can turn this off completely. There's no input switch on here per se, but that will just mean that if you were to set this to be C3, for example, if you were to press then a D3, the filter will open to the appropriate amount to have the same tone as what you'd had on that. This is quite handy by default, that being on, but if you ever wanted to have it so that the filter does not change depending on what note you play, you just bring the pitch all the way down. Again, phaser, another instrument that we have the possibility for the pitch prechord. Lastly, we then have phase prechords, and phase I'm going to talk about in more depth in a later video, but when we press play, you'll see that all of these devices, without being connected to anything, move through the stages at exactly the same speed. They all have 8 steps, but even if I were to change this to be 3 steps, we still cycle through it at the same time. It's as if there's something coordinating all of them to say, like, doesn't matter how many things you're doing, just make sure that you all start again at the same point, and that is phase. This signal we see here going from 0 to almost 1 and coming back down again is responsible for creating the movement through these stages. And by default, these are all connected to the grid patches phase signal, and we can check what that's set as by clicking on the device, and we can see device phase 1 bar. So all it's saying is, for this device, fit 3 stages into 1 bar. Or for these guys, make 8 steps fit into 1 bar. Let's put this back to 8 again. Now, what's quite cool about the device, or the phase section, is that we could change the way that this moves through the stages by altering the phase, just the same as we could change the way that envelopes are triggered by affecting the gate signal. But let's first start with then the gates. Let's also bring just a pitch in again. Okay, so I'm going to remove some of these guys. In fact, let's just take an AD for now. And we'll take a sine wave. And we'll take an audio out. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. In fact, we don't need that to be connected. So right away, I can now play through, I can play this as a patch. This is the equivalent of the default patch loaded up. If I were to then turn off the prechord, we're not getting any notes until I then connect up exactly what we had before again. And why would I want to do this when I could just not do that and have it work exactly the same? Well, the joy of bringing in any of these I/O modules means that we can then alter the signal before it reaches its destination. Having something set up as a prechord means that it will just work exactly how is expected. But now that we've turned off this prechord, we can do a number of things to change the way that the gate is being sent to the envelope. One good example would be to delay the signal. So if I were to press the note for it to actually hit the envelope a little later, we could use that. We could use a logic delay for that. So if I then attach that, for the sake of clarity, let's bring it over here. If I then attach a logic delay just before the envelope, and we put it on entire envelope shift, what I can do now is I can say, when I press a note, wait 1.26 seconds to send it to the envelope. So here we go. There we go. What else could we do with it? Well, we could quantize it. And by quantizing it, I mean we could make it so that we can never play a note out of time. I'm going to take a clock quantize here and attach that before the AD. And in fact, let's bring it over here. And for the sake of making this nice and tidy, we're going to have the straight gate signal coming into this top oscilloscope, and then we're going to have the quantized version coming in down here. And we need to actually quantize this to something. I'm going to set that to trigger, because we're on a trigger envelope, and we need to quantize it to something. So for that, I'm going to use a gates module, and I'm going to say quarter notes, or half notes, sorry, should then be the trigger for this. So if I now put my metronome on, and I press a note halfway through the signal, you'll see up here, as soon as I press the note, we're going to read that trigger. But on the bottom one, it's going to wait until one of these two notes to actually send. Let me actually set this to go through. Okay, here we go. And if we were to set this to, say, 16 steps, we could effectively create, I mean, I personally never really play 30-second steps. This basically means that I can just not ever play in time. And that's quite cool if you were to be performing live, because obviously up here you can change the recording quantization, but you can't actually do that live like you can here. So that's one of the benefits of being able to bring the gate signal in and alter it, is it just gives us a lot of different possibilities of change to the signal. So let's get rid of that for now. Let's go down to the pitch section. So obviously with this sine wave, we've already looked at already Let's go for audio out, and we'll bring another envelope in, just so we don't get bored of the drone. So, obviously, as we've mentioned before, as I press the notes going up, I'm spreading them correctly across the keyboard. And if I were to bring then the pitch information in and turn it off again, we're in exactly the same spot, although we now have this possibility to alter the signal before it reaches the sine wave's pitch section. So one classic thing which we could do is use a pitch quantizer, and if we attach that before, now it doesn't matter if I press any of the black notes, they're being quantized into the C major scale. So by bringing the pitch in, we're then able to quantize it to a set selection of notes. I could choose a 5-note scale, and if I were to press an F, we're now actually getting a G. Another thing that we could do is transpose notes. So we could say, even if I'm pressing a C3, I want it to be a C2. This could be handy for when you're creating layered patches, where you want whatever note you're playing to be sent to another instrument 2 octaves lower for the bass line. If we go here to pitch again, where are we? You can see that there are a number of sections here for each of the individual categories. You can see there are a number of devices that we're going to touch on and how you can alter the signal. Anyways, let's move on to phase, because this is my personal favorite. So let me just turn this metronome down a bit. So you can see that this is moving through at the same speed that this saw wave seems to go from 0 to 1. And if I were to turn off the phase prechord, you'll see that it's not even moving anymore. And that's because there's no information telling this device how long its cycle should be. Having exactly 8 steps doesn't mean much unless you know how long it should take to do those 8 steps. So again, we could just attach the same phase device and we'll be back to normal. But what we can do now is alter the phase signal and do something in between to then create a different pattern than what is being sent to whatever else is pre-chorded to the phase. So one of the most classic things we could do is change the speed of it. I could now make it so that this phase signal isn't changing, but we're now going double the speed. This is a good way of being able to keep everything in time with each other, but alter like nice ratios and multiples. We could slow it down. We could also do certain other things in the phase category, such as we could put a reverse on. And what that's going to mean is even though the phase is going forward, we're now reversing through the pattern. We could also use a mirror, and that will obviously make us go forward and backwards. And you'll see that this phase pattern stays the same, but because we're then altering the phase pattern here, what's actually coming out of it looks a little different. If we put that down there, in the same amount of space of that phase going from 0 to 1, we're fitting that in twice and going back down again. If I were to change that to a reverse module, you can see that when this hits 0, that's hitting almost 1. So the possibility for more complex patches really arises when you start to turn off the prechords. They are very handy and very useful, but there are a lot of devices where they have these little things that if you look into it a little deeper and think, well, what could I do to alter the signal path? Very often they begin with turning off the prechord. Well, I hope that this has been a nice brief overview into what prechords are, how to use them, and when not to use them. I'm going to be talking, as I said, a little bit more in depth about phase in the coming days. And as always, happy Tuesday and happy creating.